It started as a whisper, just after dusk, when the wind curled low past the hedgerows and the chimney smoke folded into fog. Someone or something began to sing, not clearly, not in words, but across 3 evenings the tune came through, mewing, softly, rising and falling with the strange cadence of music. A melody too precise to be chance, too old-sounding to be modern. It floated on the hush between conversations, slipped into hallways of half-sleep, and nudged its way into dreams. No one really talked about it, not at first, not until the melody became familiar. It was night 3 when Mrs. Halberd leaned out her upstairs window on Maple Street, shawl tucked under her arms and tea cooling on the sill. She had heard it again, that sound like a cat trying to hum, but this time something stopped her. She could name the song. She whispered it, that's Alice's lullaby, and it was the same tune Alice Renfield had sung to her children, to her husband when he couldn't sleep, to herself in the kitchen with her sleeves dusted in flour. An old song, sweet and thin like paper left too long in a drawer, half Hungarian in tone, half wind and wonder, and unmistakable to anyone who'd known Alice. But Alice had passed 3 winters ago, quietly, a fire burning low in the hearth, her daughter Mara at her side. That lullaby had been buried with her until now. By morning, more neighbors had heard it. Not words, never words. Just the rise and fall of feline breath, curling into something like a song. A grey shape seen briefly beneath street lamps, a pair of pale eyes flashing from the hedges. Some thought they dreamed it. Some didn't remember falling asleep. But all of them remembered the song. It grew stranger. A deliveryman, pausing by the walkway, swore he heard someone singing behind the garden gate, a low and steady coo, like something meant to soothe. He leaned closer, curious, but the gate creaked open on its own, and no one was there but a grey cat seated neatly among clover blooms. She met his gaze, then walked away. He didn't share the story until days later, after someone else, Elise, from number 18, mentioned her toddler settling in her sleep without crying for the first time in weeks. Elise had thought it coincidence, until she found scratch marks on the window ledge, and a trail of paw prints on the blanket. Not muddy, not dusty, just frost. The cat didn't belong to anyone, though everyone remembered seeing her, as though she'd always been there, slipping between fences and stone walls, impossible to follow. No collar, no sound when she walked, just a hush that lingered where she passed, and always, just before she appeared, that song. Some claimed she perched outside the library long after closing, tail curled, face tipped to the stained glass moon in the old weather vane. Others saw her near the schoolyard, or sleeping in the church garden beneath the stone angel with the missing hand. She did not beg, she did not purr, she sang, and every time someone swore it couldn't be true, that cats didn't sing that. Ghosts don't return in Pawprints. They'd hear it again, that same tune, the lullaby that hadn't been sung in years. And the cat, the quiet grey thing, sitting just beneath the window, watching the house where Alice Renfield once lived. Eyes like melting frost, listening, bringing something back, or perhaps never having left. Alice Renfield had a voice like the hush before snowfall, soft, certain, and full of something older than herself. She never sang loudly, never performed, but when the day's noise quieted, when spoons rested in the sink, and dusk turned its blue into ink, she would hum a single lullaby, low and slow, traced by memory rather than sheet music. Her fingers would trail along the edge of her favorite mug. Her foot would rock gently, even when no child sat nearby. The tune always felt too delicate to belong to this world. It curved and dipped in ways no one could write down properly. Not lullaby, soft, more like riverbed soft, shaped by time and generations, kneeling close to water. When Alice sang it, the song slipped into the walls, into the seams of the house itself, until even the floorboards seemed to breathe softer. Her daughter, Mara, had grown up with that song tucked into her heartbeat like a bookmark, though now, years later, she could barely recall how it started. Not truly. After Alice passed, Mara had tried, once or twice, to hum it herself, but the notes got lost in her throat. Her voice cracked in the wrong places. She stopped trying. It wasn't just grief, it was the deep aching kind, the kind with echoes, where memory tries to reach a hand through shadows and comes back empty. But Alice had never once written it down. No recording, no words on paper, just her voice in the air, woven with firelight and flower, carried only in her breath. Her mother had taught it to her, Alice once said, and her grandmother before that. A song older than time, or at least older than quiet Sunday kitchens where it had hummed softly for generations, and no one else remembered how it went. Not Mara, not the neighbors who used to wave as Alice sang with windows open in spring, not the friend who used to visit at twilight and sit on the porch swing sipping tea. Everyone remembered the feeling the lullaby gave them, but not the tune itself, which is why, when it came back, not through a person, but through the mouth of something unnamed, it didn't feel possible. And yet, there it was, emerging in Muse. Fragile but sure. The cat, the grey one seen near the garden, wasn't just mimicking noise. The notes matched, the pitch uncanny. By the third evening, Mara had frozen mid-dishwashing as the sound came through the window. She shut off the faucet, listened, and felt her knees weaken. Her towel pressed to her chest, dripping cold against her shirt, her breath uneven, because she knew what she was hearing. She would have sworn anything by memory, by love, by the ache of absence. In her throat what she heard was her mother's lullaby. Not exactly, but close enough to pierce, close enough that memory rose up and filled the corners again that night. Mara took out the old photograph, the one of her and Alice on the back porch, both with flower-dusted cheeks and a pie between them. She set it beside the armchair, then sat still, lights low, house quiet, and waited outside. Something poured once at the window pane. Then again, a single note followed. 4 notes more. The hush in the room became a cathedral of quiet. Mara didn't cry. Not yet, but her hand drifted to where the cat had sung, to the window's edge, and rested there. The glass was not warm, nor cold, just still. Alice's lullaby, now breathing through something else, not a person, not a child, not a radio, hidden away in some dusty room. A cat she didn't know, but who seemed to know her. She came with the wind. That's what Mara would say later. Though the evening itself held no wind to speak of, only a hush, the kind that settles thick over the earth before a storm. The trees were still, the garden heavy with the scent of damp soil and early crocus. That day, one of those days when grief felt carved into every corner of the house, Mara had opened all the windows, letting the air pass through like a blessing, or maybe a surrender. And then, there she was, small, grey, thin but not frail, curled in the dirt beneath the wind chimes, as if the song from the night before had rippled through her own bones too. She didn't flinch when Mara opened the screen door, didn't mew, just looked up, her eyes a pale, unsettling thing, not unfriendly, but as unreadable as rime on stone. Mara stepped closer. The cat blinked, one paw tucked against her chest, then stretched. She rolled lightly to one side and watched, eyes half-lidded, as if she'd been waiting. "Hello," Mara said, her voice uncertain after a day spent unused. The cat didn't respond, but she didn't leave. Not that evening, nor the next. She stayed tucked between lavender stalks and cracked stepping stones, mostly out of sight, but never out of presence. Mara set a bowl of water on the porch steps. By morning, it was empty. She wasn't thin in the starved way, just small, light, clean somehow, even after days outdoors, a coat that never clung to bramble, paws without dirt beneath the nails. When she moved, it was like tipping between shadows, not quite graceful, not quite real. She never meowed during the day. Only once the house went still when dishes were away, and kitchen lights turned off did that faint sound return, threading through the glass, so soft it could be mistake. Always the same set of notes, like someone fingering the edges of memory just to find its weight again. Mara didn't bring her in, not at first. Something about the cat felt borrowed, not stray, not domesticated, but other, as if letting her inside might break some unspoken arrangement. So she left the window cracked and placed a folded blanket by the sill. She named her Clovernot for the plant she rested in, but for the strange, quiet luck that seemed to accompany her, a kind of sudden softening around the edges of hard days. One evening, Mara returned home after a walk and found Clover sitting on the porch, railing, not curled or resting, just sitting, upright, eyes fixed on the setting sun. "What are you looking for?" Mara asked, not expecting an answer. The cat turned her head, slowly, and stared back, not questioning, just ... acknowledging. That night, when Mara brushed her teeth and leaned to shut the bathroom window, she paused. The air stirred the curtain. Outside, in the dark yard, Clover's silhouette was still visible, tail, curled ears flicking toward the sound of cicadas, and faintly, very faintly, that thread-like lullaby passed again through the leaves. She wasn't singing for Mara. She was singing to the house. After that evening, things shifted in ways Mara couldn't explain. She'd find her old mother's scarf left years ago on a shelf, resting newly warm on the back of a chair. The clock in the hallway, long since unwound, began to tick again. Once, when Mara walked into the bedroom, she could have sworn she smelled cinnamon and sage, the scent of Alice's winter baking, though no spices had been opened in weeks. Clover followed no pattern. Sometimes she vanished for a stretch of days. Sometimes she sat still as statues for hours in the window, head tilted fractionally to one side. And always, when the lullaby came, Clover was near. Not performing, not even expressing, just being, humming something not from her throat, but from space around her, an echo of a presence too big for her body. By the second week, Mara stopped questioning the impossibility of it. She simply let it be. She let the quiet hold her. She let the cat stay, and somewhere, some strange and sacred place, just between the map of memory and the rhythm of Breathless's voice, hummed on, wrapped in fur, in silence, and in this small presence that had come without reason, without history, without explanation, just a tune, and eyes like melting frost that remembered before Mara did. Mara had stopped keeping track of the days Clover had been part of the house. Whether weeks had passed or merely a handful of evenings, she couldn't tell anymore. The rhythm of grey fur moving across window ledges and the quiet, aching tune. In the dark it started to fit into the shape of her life. Like a scent so long familiar, it became part of her skin, and yet she still hadn't spoken a word about the lullaby. Aloud, not to the neighbors, not to Elise, not even to herself, properly. Saying it out loud might press too hard on the fragile shell between explanation and wonder, and Mara wasn't quite ready to see which way the pieces would fall. But the question pressed at her every night. Was she making it up? Grief had a way of warping sound, loosening the truth around its edges. Sometimes, when sorrow ran too deep, the world blurred its boundaries to keep hearts from fracturing. Mara knew this. She had read about it, dreamed about it, lived inside it. How many memories? Had she doubted because they seemed too vivid, too tender? The mind made echoes when it missed a voice enough. So one night she dared, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor. The tea growing cool beside her, she looked toward the window and said softly, "Am I imagining it?" Just 6 words, whispered. Into the hush, she waited, disbelief caught in her breath. That night, Clover did not meow. She stretched along the bench on the porch. Still as dusk, her gaze tilted upward as though fixed on something only she could see. The house didn't hum. The tune did not come. The silence lengthened. Mara went to bed with a strange emptiness nestled low in her ribs. She felt foolish, drenched in a kind of doubt that soured even the softest moments. Maybe the lullaby hadn't returned. Maybe it had been wild nerves and a longing heart. She pressed the pillow over her head and let the stillness drain into sleep. And then she dreamed. It wasn't a vivid dream, not in the high-color way vivid dreams usually were. It felt, instead, like walking through a place she had once known, but couldn't name. A kitchen, dim and golden, with late evening light filtering through lace curtains. The smell of lemon, of dust warmed on a stovetop. She couldn't see her mother, but she could hear her. The lullaby came whole, crystal-clear, every note flawless, lilting and alive, like a warm hand resting at the base of Mara's neck. The sound wasn't coming from her mother's lips, not exactly. It came from everywhere. Floorboards, corners, steam whispering off a mug. It wrapped itself around Mara's ribs and reminded her how it felt to breathe without guardrails. She woke just past 3 in the morning. The house was silent. The silence was different than stillness. It hummed no sound, yet somehow loud. The kind of quiet that follows a truth once spoken, or a promise not yet broken. The next morning, Mara found Clover curled on the WINDOWSILL, motionless, barely a statue with breath. Mara stared for a long time, then sat beside the window and let her forehead rest against the glass. "I heard her," she whispered. Clover's eyes flicked open gently, slowly, met hers with the knowing of something ancient and unburdened by speech. That afternoon, the clock in the hall stopped ticking. It had been faithful in its quiet rhythm for years, despite no battery change, despite no winding. But suddenly, just as Mara passed by, it ceased. The sound simply landed in silence, like an echo found its end. She turned and looked at it, startled. 3 breaths passed, then 5, no sound. But just beyond the silence, deep under her skin and memory and mourning, Mara heard the song again, not aloud, not outside. Inside, heard it without sound. She set a hand over her chest and exhaled. Fondness bloomed slowly warm, wide and aching. It was as if telling the truth. Even in a single unraveling whisper, had turned something loose in the fabric of the world. She hadn't imagined it all, and even if she had at first, now it was real. Whatever had opened for good. Clover blinked once, then closed her eyes again, and Mara, for the first time in years, leaned into the quiet and let herself hum a note. Just one. The pitch didn't crack, it didn't waver, it felt like home. The attic hadn't been opened in months. It was the kind of place that held its breath, a space not often entered out of daily need, but out of sudden longing. Dust lay thick, as if it had drifted down from some higher place, more sky than ceiling. Mara pulled the ladder down gently, afraid to disturb whatever silence it had wrapped around itself. She climbed slowly, not quite sure what she was looking for, only that she needed something more tangible than dreams and cats. Eyes, a photograph, perhaps. A picture of Alice holding the old family cat. Proof that the lullaby had not been made up, that the melody, now echoed by a feline voice, was once something real, human, lived. The air at the top smelled of cedar and rain moss. The boxes waited in their loose map of memory, old holiday decorations, photo albums bleeding at the corners, letters stuffed into tins that once held cookies smelling of clove and hope. Mara knelt beside one marked with delicate handwriting, Renfield, keepsakes. She opened the flaps, rifled through, neatly folded. Linens, a lace doily she remembered from the upstairs hallway, a pair of gloves that still smelled faintly of cold perfume. And then beneath a velvet pouch, she found a smaller box, wooden, with twine faded to colorless string. Inside, letters, bound in bundles by decade, some crisp, their ink still fresh, others crinkled and yellowed and written on paper thin as breath. Mara unknotted one loop, the 1970s set, her fingers shaking though she didn't know why. She read them slowly, the silence attentive around her. Lines about garden weather, thoughts on recipes, affection written small and tight in the way people used to write when words were rationed like sugar. And then one letter, dated August 14th, 1972, addressed to a friend named Evie. I've started humming again in the evenings. Strange how the tune finds its way back to my lips even after all these years. Mother says it came from her mother, but I still can't find it in any book. Just that one cat. Do you remember her? Pitch black with that clever polka-dotted ear. She used to meow in tune with me. Not quite singing, but something close. Mama swore it was a blessing. Said some songs are too old to only live in mouths. Mara froze. She read the paragraph again, and again, not just memory, then not just Clover. There had been another, a black cat in 1972, who, according to Alice's own hand, echoed a lullaby unearthed across generations. A song too old for books, a presence too strange to name. The letter didn't elaborate a few simple lines before trailing off into mention of peach preserves and a thunderstorm. Normal things, things the world understood, but the mystery sat there still, certain and quiet. Mara reached inside the box once more and found a smaller bundle tucked at the bottom. Loose photographs. One of a garden with Alice kneeling beside a low bush in bloom. Her hair swept up, her skirt dusty around the knees. A cat, dark and sleek, sits beside her, eyes closed, mouth slightly open in what could have been a sound. Mara held the photo closer, not because of what it showed, but because of what it made her feel. Recognition, not of the cat, not exactly, but of the stillness between them, Alice and the animal. joined in a kind of communion, neither forced nor explained. She didn't remember that cat. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the lullaby hadn't needed remembering in the way people saved recipes or wrote down stories. Maybe it passed differently, beneath fur, between lamplight and breath, through the hush around letters, but never quite inside them. The sun had started to slant against the attic window by the time Mara tied the bundle back up and traced the picture's edge one last time. Her fingers smelled of cedar, and as she descended the narrow stair, the house just below felt newly awake, as though it too had read something it wasn't meant to forget. Clover waited at the bottom of the stairs, not watching, just present in that unbothered way only cats have. Mara stepped off the ladder and smiled down. "I found her," she said, unsure if she meant the cat from the past or the version of her mother whose voice once filled the house. Clover blinked slowly, then walked away without fanfare, and as Mara gathered the photograph into the fold of her sweater, the floor beneath her feet let out a small, familiar creak, the kind it used to make when someone hummed themselves through the kitchen. The air warm with memory, the kind it made just before the first note of the lullaby began. It began with the range and tell at first, a hush along the roof like distant hands drumming their fingertips over slate. The kind of rain that doesn't quite darken the sky, only makes everything quiet and soft around the edges. Mara had just made tea when the knock came. Elise stood on the front step, baby strapped to her chest in a faded sling with a yellow duck tucked beside her ear, water beaded in her hair. Her expression was somewhere between awe and bewilderment. "She came to us last night," Elise whispered before Mara could speak. At first Mara thought she meant a nurse or friend. Someone from Elise's family perhaps, come to help with the sleepless nights. But Elise's eyes were wide in the way people's eyes are when the world shifts shape and they're still catching up. "The cat," she said. "Your cat, I think." "I don't know, grey, little." She climbed in through the nursery window. Mara blinked. Clover. Elise nodded, eyes suddenly glassy. She curled up at the foot of the crib, just settled in. And then she sang. The word hung there, awkwardly. Elise half laughed, half swallowed it. "I know how it sounds, but it was." She paused, reaching for shape in something shapeless. Not a meow, not a yowling, just these soft notes, over and over. "My little one," he just stopped. "Number." More crying, not even a stirring. He slept till dawn. Mara stepped back instinctively, gesturing Elise in the teacups still warm in their place by the sofa. Clover padded into the hall just as Elise entered and hurried. Unannounced, an utterly unsewered thee. They stared at each other for a long time. Elise and Clover, like two hands pressed palm to palm through glass. "I don't know this song," Elise murmured later, as the baby slept cupped against her shoulder. "But my grandmother, she used to sing something strange when she'd rock me. Always said it was her mother's song. She was Hungarian, but she passed when I was little. Maybe the song came from her. ... She trailed off, then laughed softly. "I must sound mad." "You sound like someone who's been listened to," Mara answered. The baby stirred once beneath the duck toy, then sighed and grew heavy again. The window beside them thudded lightly with a fresh patter of rain. Clover remained beneath it, tail wrapped neat as ribbon round her feet, watching the fields beyond with that perpetual, knowing stillness. Mara didn't speak of old letters, or the photograph, or the first lullaby that had entered through the walls like a memory too long silent. She simply made tea again, setting another cup beside Elise's empty one, not asking if she'd stay, knowing somehow she would. Later that night, long after Elise had gone her back straight in a calm she hadn't had in weeks, Mara sat in the dark living room, lights off, fingers curled around a now cold mug. The house did not feel empty. It felt fuller, as if someone had left the door open not to let something out. But something in wind shifted the curtain, and once more, that hush of sound began. Clover's small voice, somewhere just beyond the sill, threading notes into the dark. The song had grown clearer, not louder, not complete, but a little more certain. Each rise more whole, each fall more sure of its landing. It wasn't just Alice's song anymore. It belonged to the crib now, to sleep without tears, to a grandmother long gone singing in another language beside a bed in a different country's night. In that moment, Mara understood. The lullaby wasn't returning for one person. It was returning for anyone who had forgotten how to feel safe in silence. Clover sang, and behind it, between the drops of rain, another note harmonized softly. Mara froze not with fear, but with reverence. A single voice, her mother's or Elise's grandmother's, or someone older still, joined in. Not in word, just feeling. And though Mara never spoke of that second voice aloud, she learned to let it be there, folded into the edges of evenings. Memory didn't always need names. Some nights after, when the rain fell just right across the roof, and the sound of traffic slowed to a hush beneath the open window, she would hear the lullaby again, stronger now, and in the middle of the street, visible only until you blinked, a baby carriage rolling gently with no hands. A breath of lilac faded through the air, and Clover sitting at the curb, eyes steady, not watchful, only content, as if the lullaby had done its work for one more night. It started with the librarian. She was shelving Return's quiet work, methodical, and found herself pausing with a book in her hands. Not because of its title, though it did stir something vaguely known, but because something inside her had begun to hum, not aloud, just under breath, a tune like smoke rising from somewhere forgotten. She set the book down, took a step back, and whispered, "I haven't thought of that song in years." The book was a folktale collection, frayed at the spine, the index handwritten in faded pencil. She flipped to the last third of the volume, as if her fingers had known all along, and there it was. A story from a region on no modern map. A tale of women who sang to the moon so their husbands wouldn't lose their way home after war. The lullaby, transcribed only in approximated syllables, said to have been called Satordal, Kumpi Song, a cradle prayer and a grief offering, sung in years when names were forgotten faster than melodies. The librarian ran a finger under the printed words, the tune quietly reassembling itself in her chest. Her grandmother had hummed something like this once. She remembered the smell of wool and dried lavender, late afternoon light in a kitchen window, a note that rose like a prayer and fell like a leaf. That week, other stories emerged, like frost, surfacing in a pattern never seen before. Charles Jecklin, white-haired and blue-eyed, still at 92, heard a whisper of the tale at his barbershop and stared, stunned, at the empty haircutting chair. "That song," he said, "my nursemaid sang it in the shelter during the war. She only knew the tune, said it wasn't hers, but passed down from her aunt who kept bees near the borderlands. He hadn't remembered it in 70 years. Used to dream of it," he added. "Stopped after my wife died. In a corner shop downtown, an old pair of sisters who hadn't spoken in years, sat sipping tea and sorting buttons by color. One of them hummed, almost by accident. The other dropped her spoon. "That's Mama's lullaby," she said. "No," the other corrected, but gently. "That's Grandma's. Mum had just borrowed it, in a town where news was mostly left over. Gossip and church flyers." The stories grew, soft-spoken recollections from those who'd never thought themselves sentimental. They came to the library, to the market, to the shaded bench in the cemetery, where someone left a note written in ballpoint and placed beneath a stone. I heard the song just once, when I was a child, and my mother thought I was sleeping. She wept as she sang it. I never asked why. The stories converged on Clover. Children passing her whispered that they felt calm when she was near, even if they weren't sure why. A boy with a stutter sat beside her outside the bakery and said his words came easier that afternoon. A widower claimed he heard his late wife's voice again for the first time in a dream, lilting in that same strange tune, and woke to find the grey cat curled atop her side of the bed. No one had claimed Clover, but it was as if she belonged. Everywhere, Mara began collecting small phrases, scribbled on napkins, receipts, the backs of donation envelopes. Bits of melody, remembered syllables, old country vowels that didn't fit into English shapes. Not translations, not exactly echoes. Some sang of rest, some of return. Others simply repeated one small line over and over, like a doorway between worlds. You are not forgotten. You are not alone. June Halbert's daughter came by with a tarnished locket, something her mother had always worn but never opened. She placed it silently on Mara's porch. Inside, a scrap of paper, so worn it was nearly translucent, with a single phrase in shaky script sat: "Dole lives where silence listens." That afternoon, the town felt different, as though something just behind the clouds began to stir. The trees along the main road dropped their leaves all at once, not quite seasonally, but like a bow, like an old promise being kept. Clover walked the sidewalk with purpose, pausing beside those who had shared their stories, weaving between canes and shopping bags and creaking porch steps. And Mara, watching from her doorway, couldn't help but feel as though the cat wasn't walking through the town but remembering it. As if, within her pause, ghosted footsteps returned the echo of those who had sung the song long ago. Now walking beside her in a hush the living could only just hear. The town remembered. Not everything, not clearly, not names or full verses, but the feeling, the shape of care that hovered just above sorrow. The soft presence of a lullaby meant not to end, only to drift forward. And in that remembering, something fragile began. 2 heel cracks not gone, but lined with gold, like stories that hold even when voices shake, like a meow that trembles in tune when the night is quiet enough to hear it. The lullaby was no longer just Alice's. It never had been. Her name was spoken in passing, mostly a woman too old to walk far, but known for her peppermint tea and the way she remembered every birth in town. June Halbert had been there for nearly all of them. Midwife, neighbor, keeper of small traditions. Now, in her mid-90s, she lived in the same house her father built, one plank at a time, tucked beneath a willow tree behind the elementary school. The children said her eyes looked like marble, cloudy and deep. But those who knew her better said her eyes missed nothing. Mara hadn't visited June in years, not since Alice's service, when June had placed an arm round her shoulder with such gentle weight that Mara forgot, for a second, what it meant to carry grief alone. The years had shuffled forward since then, too fast and too soft-footed to hold on to properly, like pages turned under breezes. You couldn't block, but word of the lullaby had reached June. The midwife had heard the whispers. Rising note at the edge of town, the memories stirred like pools after rain. The cat with the frost-touched gaze and the strange music that accompanied her like ribbon, unraveling behind a breath. So when Mara appeared at her door one afternoon, holding a bag of rosehip jam and a loaf of bread still warm from the bakery, she wasn't greeted in surprise. June opened the door slowly, her breath folding in the air like woven lace, and smiled. "Well," she said, as if the story had already been told to her, "she's singing again." Mara blinked, searching for something in her jacket's lining, an apology, an explanation, an offering of proof. But June only nodded toward the porch swing. They sat in the quiet, the sun curled low behind gnarled branches, and for a long while neither spoke. "She did the same thing for my sister," June said at last. Her voice had the softness of flannel tucked over knees in winter. "Back in '42, the old black cat, my mother couldn't have told you where she came from, only that she couldn't cry after the stillborn until she heard that mewing near the wall." June paused, her hand resting on the top of her cane. One tucks a letter into a drawer, sounded like wind trying to remember a tune. Mara shifted, eyes wide with the hush of recognition. And the melody, June's gaze turned distant, like someone watching memory pass down the street. "It's not always the same," she said. "Not exactly. Same shape, different breath. Sometimes gentler, sometimes sharp, like the edge of a cracked teacup. Depends on who needs it." Mara set the bread between them. "So, it's happened before." "More than once," June said, "but never where people noticed together. Usually just one soul at a time." She looked at Mara then, with the weight of rivers and birth certificates and lullabies folded deep. Behind her eyes, "You're lucky it's being heard now. That means something." They sat through the slow settling of dusk, the wind falling into the low hush between seasons. A cat, though not Clover, not exactly, could be seen across the street. Same gait, same grey shape, but older, it seemed. Or newer. Time didn't sit neatly on this one. "Some songs don't belong to mouths," June murmured, almost to herself. "Some belong to spaces." Mara nodded, though she wasn't sure why. "My mother used to say," June continued, "that the song finds places where sorrow sits too long. It brushes the dust off with breath, doesn't take the grief, doesn't steal it, just makes it open its eyes, that stayed in the air between them like perfume laid down generations ago." By the time Mara stood to leave, her hands smelled faintly of peppermint and something else, lavender, maybe, or old cedar drawers. She turned back on the porch, meaning to ask something more. Was the cat real? Was she sent? Was it Alice? Was grief an echo, or a beginning? But June had closed her eyes. Her cane rested against her chest, as if cradled by memory itself. And though she still breathed, her breath was the kind found just before dreams come. That winter, June passed quietly in her sleep, with hands folded. The faintest smile at the corner of her mouth, and a single note traced into the sheet near her side, as if someone had meowed in tune only she could hear. And she, at last, recognized the verse for herself. The townspeople said she lived a good life, long and whole, with babies and thunder and stories wrapped in cloth napkins. But Mara knew something others didn't say aloud. June hadn't been waiting to die. She had been waiting to hear the lullaby one last time, and when she did, She simply followed it out. Not gone, just ahead. The rain had come fast that afternoon, full and clanging like something urgent. Mara didn't mind. She liked the world quieter, framed through glass, the smell of petrichor rising with the windows fogged. It was the sort of day meant for boxes stacked, and old and bowed at the corners in the hall closet. She'd been meaning to organize them, told herself so once every year around this time. The rain gave her permission. The third box down had her handwriting on the side, Marda Tress, RD Bed. She smiled at the smudge of frosting left from a sticker that once held balloons. Inside were paper plates folded flat, a napkin with marker drawing, tiny striped candles bundled together with rubber bands so dry they cracked, and tapes, the kind loaded with static and home. 2 of them marked in her father's tidy block letters, one in Alice's scrawl, soft loops, barely readable, birthday plus cake. She turned the old camcorder on, warmth blooming at the click. The tape whirred. The screen flared to life with lines of static before settling into grainy movement. The frame tracking a yard, dotted with folding chairs and streamers pulled too tight between them. There she was, small, round-cheeked, frosting on her chin and arms lifted to show all 5 fingers, though she'd just turned 3. In the background, laughter, Alice's voice. Mara hadn't heard it in motion for years. That soft rise at the end of each word. The cadence of someone who carried warmth the way tea carries quiet. A laugh, quick and unguarded. She loves the chocolate one. Look at her, my goodness. The camera jostled, a hand her father's likely zooming in on the cake, then panning to the porch where Alice sat smiling behind her daughter. And just to her left, barely visible, cat grey striped, still as a stone ornament, mouth open, mouth moving. Mara leaned closer, backed the tape up, played it again there, in hardly a second of video, just as the music from the cassette player drifted through the yard children's songs translated into gentle melodies. There the cat's head tilted, the mouth opened once, shut, then again, just twice. In rhythm, no sound reached the camera, but Mara felt it. It was singing. She paused the tape, ran it backward again, let her eyes blur until it stopped being cats and birthday cake and a porch, with dry paint flakes curling from its posts. It was a moment. That's all, but she knew that cat, not by name, not by presence. Something else, recognition, not of the form, but of the gesture, the knowing, the watching. The song, the time stamp, read 1993. Mara pressed rewind, letting the wheel spin and the rain drum louder outside. When the tape clacked to a stop, she sat, unmoving for many minutes. Her hands were folded. Her heart had begun to hum, not in words, just shape, just echo. A song that had watched her even when she hadn't known it was there. Elsewhere, in the house, Clover stirred. A single thump as she dropped from a windowsill. She passed the hallway, tail flicking once against the doorframe, and settled in the kitchen where the biscuits were cooling on a wire rack Alice no longer owned. The photograph Mara had placed. Days ago, Alice kneeling in the garden, with the dark cat beside her fell, slightly sideways in its frame. Not all the way, just crooked, like a wink. Outside, the rain turned heavy again, but inside, the lullaby had already returned. Not in sound, in footage, in memory, in a flicking tail, and a frozen frame that hadn't moved in decades, but now sang anyway. Summer brought a heat that didn't seem interested in daylight. It lingered instead in the corners of the house, behind curtain folds and between the threads of bedsheets. Even the garden, the usual refuge, hung heavy with motionless air. Bees moved slow. Wind forgot how to stir the leaves. And Clover, always seen before heard, vanished. It was a quiet disappearance. No doors left open. No screen torn, no paw prints left across the window ledge. One evening, she was curled on the porch railing, watching lightning far off where the hills met sky. And by morning, she was gone. Mara waited. She left a bowl of water near the door, then food, then a folded blue scarf Clover had once napped on, still faintly threaded with fur. Days passed, then weeks. The water evaporated under the sun's weight, the food untouched, the scarf bleached at one edge by light. Nothing returned. The silence inside the house changed shape. No longer meditative or filled with expectancy, it hollowed out. It didn't hum, it listened tightly. Mara did everything the same. Watered the fern in the back hall, opened the porch door each dusk, kept the window cracked at night, and no one came. Pain settled without drama. There were no sobs, no hurried calls to shelters or garages. Mara simply quieted, as though some internal room had emptied and she wasn't yet ready to go in and look. It wasn't the fear that something had happened to Clover that hurt most. It was the feeling that something had finished, as if a note had finally resolved. The cat song, the lullaby, the strange hush between the stitches of memoriette had come for a purpose, had served it, and left. But 2 weeks after Clover's absence, broke past silence and into ache, something happened. It began with humming. Mara was brushing her hair in the mirror. She hadn't meant to hum, not consciously. It rose by itself, formed low in her throat, wrapped its way into the space like steam. It was the lullaby, tentative, but carried not from memory, she realized, but from somewhere older than memory, deeper than where most thoughts begin. She paused and kept humming. The notes rose in sequence. No breaks, no falters, as if her voice had always been a cup waiting to be filled again. She closed her eyes and let it go on. At the third repeat, she wept, quietly, in that clean way grief allows after rest. The house shifted for the first time in weeks. The stillness became warmth again. The dust smelled like flour, not emptiness. A chair creaked in the next room without movement. The hallway swallowed the sound in that familiar way that homes do when they choose to hold rather than echo. That night, Mara dreamed again. She walked into her old childhood kitchen, light pouring through windows that hadn't existed in a long time. And Alice stood there, not ghostly, not dramatic, simply there. She poured tea from a kettle, sliced peaches, brushed Mara's hair with her fingers. It was the comfort of nothing needing to be explained. "You didn't lose her," Alice said, not looking up from her chore. "She's ahead of you." The words didn't need defining. She's not gone, she's ahead. Like a note returning in the second movement, like a pulse between beats. Mara barely spoke in the dream, but her hands knew what to do. They folded napkins. They set the table. They opened the window to let in the clean wind that finally arrived at last, when she woke past sunrise, feeling ache and ease in equal measure. The scarf by the door had fallen over, tangled in the wind, but no paw prints came through it. No. Meow followed. Still, something had changed. The weight of loss did not vanish, but beneath it, beneath the layers of longing and the pause where a presence used to sit there, was something. New. Strength. Not the kind that clenches fists or beats, louder than sorrow, the kind that stays, the kind that lets you rise without asking permission from the ache. That morning, Mara sang the lullaby aloud. She stood in the kitchen with steam rising from the kettle, and the morning light golden on the tile, and she let the tune fall from her lips without fear. The house listened from the windowsill. The old clock ticked from the yard. The first breeze in days stirred the wind chimes, and though Clover did not return that day or the next, Mara felt no dread, no panic. Some things didn't need watching to be known. She would come again, or she already had, in dream, in voice, in the lullaby that now belonged not just to Alice or Mara, or any single thread of memory, but to the promise that something tender always waits ahead. 10 years passed like pages turn in a well-loved book, some slow and some all at once. The house changed, softened by time and small repaints, but the lullaby, strangely, did not fade. It came less frequently, its thread pulled only by silence, or still wind, but it never vanished. Mara aged gently. The lines around her mouth deepened more from laughter than time. Her hands bore small scars from garden shears and baking tins. Where once she'd curled into silence, now she carried it with familiarity, a companion, not a burden. She had turned the back section of the house into a cat sanctuary, cats mostly, worn with the world's edges, their eyes clouded but bright with affection. Some were abandoned with names, others without. All came quietly, and all, Mara noticed, seemed drawn toward the kitchen bench where Clover used to sit. And then there was Peter. He arrived from the city, newly 7, impossibly thin, wide-eyed, not from wonder, but from the absence of it. A caseworker brought him, holding his backpack like it might contain the last of him. His parents gone in an accident that left few words, only papers and polite nods. Peter didn't speak, not at first, not with persuasion or patience or time. Mara didn't try to fill the air. She showed him the greenhouse, the indoor reading tent with string lights, a bowl of cinnamon oranges by the window. She let him walk each room at his own pace. He didn't cry, didn't refuse food, didn't react at all, but he followed the cats, always the oldest ones. The splayed-out marmalade with one good ear, the skittish tuxedo that only moved at dusk, and most of all, the quietest of the lot, a pale cream tabby with eyes like scraped glass. Peter would sit near her for hours, not touching, not looking, directly, just near. After weeks of silence, he began humming in the garden, not loud, not labored, just notes that floated, barely shaped, just enough to make a breeze pause. Mara first heard it while watering the violets. She turned slowly. Peter crouched over the mint patch, his lips not quite moving, but the sound undeniably rising from him, a humming that dipped and swayed in ways too familiar to name at first. Then it hit her, the lullaby, not broken, complete, not fumbled, but full light as conversation between trees. Mara didn't interrupt. She didn't even step forward. She set the watering can down and sat on the edge of the path, heart held quietly in her hands, as if touching the moment too forcefully might scatter it. Later, as dusk thickened in the corners, she asked gently, "Where? Did you hear that?" Peter looked up at her for the first time that day. Really looked, eyes clearing like warmed glass. "The kitten," he said softly. "The one that sleeps beside me sometimes." Mara blinked. "Which one?" Peter's gaze tilted, uncertain. "She doesn't have a name. She's small, grey, but with speckles. Eyes like purple storms." Mara rose slowly. She had walked the house. She knew every paw, every tail, every curve of fur and purr and limp. None of the cats had violet eyes, but she didn't argue. "Where does she come from?" she asked. Peter shrugged, pulling a twist of mint leaf between his fingers. "Only at night. She sings real quiet. But I think I used to know the song before the crash. I feel it in my bones." Mara nodded. She didn't press, didn't correct the word kitten. For cat or whisper, the weight of names long past. She simply placed her hand gently on his shoulder. That night, a new cat showed up in the records one. Unchipped, unnamed, pressed delicate against Peter's door come morning. Grey fur, tail flicking with unreadable rhythm. She walked into the kitchen on silent paws and sat, just once, upon Clover's old bench. Peter followed her in wordlessly, sat near her, didn't touch, then began to hum again. Mara stood at the stove, her back half turned, tears unexpected and without warning biting the corners of her lashes. But she didn't wipe them. She just stood still, hand resting on the saucepan lid, like the moment couldn't be covered, like the steam inside belonged to something sacred. Now the new cat stayed. Not every night, not for everyone, but when Peter's shoulders began to straighten a little, when the quiet humming opened into song, when other children visited and felt safe in the strange calm of the house, then Mara knew the lullaby had not gone. It had chosen someone new to carry it forward, and this time its voice began not from loss, but from soft beginning. The air remained threaded with it, not loudly, not always, but enough. The firelight made everyone look softer. It was the first truly cold night of the season, the kind that bit into sleeves and turned breath visible. Neighbors had gathered in the common yard behind the old church, brought together by instinct, more than invitation. Someone had stacked logs, someone else had lit the pit. Folded chairs, mismatched and chipped, ringed the glow. Mugs steamed in mittened hands. Laughter curled low, like smoke, like stories passed through generations. Mara sat near the edge, a blanket tucked around her knees and a thermos of chai warming her hands. She hadn't spoken much, just listened. The air was full of quiet things, pages turning in the minds of the old. Footsteps of children chasing shadows, the sigh from logs breaking beneath flame. The space between conversations was its own kind of music. Then it happened, a stir near the path. Just beyond where light met dark, an old cat stepped into view, grey as rain clouds, with a deep ripple to her coat. Not quite the same as Clover, but close grey with hints of silvered ash. A dusting of white across her chest like snowfall caught on stone. Her eyes were dim in the way memories can be, frosted but unmistakable. She walked without hurry. Number, hesitation, a slow weaving between boots and wool blankets toward the center fire. No one moved. She stopped beside Mara's folded chair, tail coiled around her paws, and looked up, not pleading, not questioning, just looking. Then she moved on, toward Mr. Jacklin, who'd stopped mid-sentence. The cat brushed against his ankle, circled once, toward Elise, whose eyes brimmed without falling, toward Peter, older now, curled beside a friend on a blanket. He leaned forward with quiet reverence, lips parted just slightly, as though half hoping some melody might pass through again. The cat simply moved one person to the next, never rushed, never still quite long enough to be claimed. She made a full circle of the gathering, then paused near the fire ring. The wind stirred. A leaf skittered over the bricks. Someone no one knew who began to hum, soft, instinctive. A sound dredged up from some forgotten shoreline inside the self. The lullaby, as close as anyone could remember. And almost at once, others joined, barely more than breath, a low, aching harmony rising round the flames. No words, no conductor, just memory, summoned and shape-shifted into sound. The cat sat, the fire cracked, and Mara inhaled sharply, not from cold or wonder, but something quieter. She had the sudden, wordless knowledge that this was goodbye. Not a leaving laced with sadness, but a release, like a thread that had finished its weaving. The old cat didn't sing, didn't call. She only turned her face toward the stars, those pale dots burning like memories above their heads, and blinked once, slow. The crowd fell utterly silent, the kind of silence that means something is happening inside the world you cannot see. Then the cat rose to standing, tilted her head toward Mara. A single, almost imperceptible sound left her throat, not a meow, not the tune, just air-shaped into note. Mara swallowed it like air. It hit deep, rib cage and breath and marrow. It unfastened something, and it stitched. Something else closed. The cat stepped once into shadow and was gone. The cold returned. Someone shifted in their chair. Someone coughed, embarrassed by the hush, but no one called out. They all knew. The fire crackled. Bright again, the hum softened, then faded entirely. Voices resumed, not louder, but steadier. Stories picked back up at their middles. Marshmallows turned quietly on sticks. The evening carried forward like a careful gift, passed hand to hand without speaking words, like magic or farewell. Mara sat back. Her chai had gone cold. She didn't mind. What stayed was the warmth curled deep in her chestnut firelight. Not memory, not even the lullaby. Something older, something true. And for the first time in years, she didn't look for Clover, because she'd already been seen. It started on a bus, weaving slowly through the edges of town where the roads forgot their names. A woman in her 60s, hair pinned up with a plastic barrette shaped like a butterfly, was humming beneath her breath. The sound was more breath than tune, barely audible, worn soft with age. She didn't know when she'd started. The notes came without thinking, lifting gently between stops as cornfields wheeled past the windows. The boy beside her shifted in his seat and whispered, "My mum sings that," though she hadn't. He frowned, as if memory had bent backward into something too old for fact. In another part of town, a toddler murmured in her sleep. Just one sound at first, then a pattern. Her parents paused on the stairs that night, frozen mid-step. The father leaned toward the baby monitor and mouthed the old tune. Not loudly, not perfectly, just there, rising quietly out of the dark, like breath fogging a mirror. These were only the beginning. A florist closed her shop early one Thursday, moved by a longing she couldn't name. She wandered the river's edge, shoes in hand, humming under the low boughs of the fig trees. Behind her, pigeons stirred in unison as if called. A teenager held the hand of an elderly neighbor while waiting for an ambulance. She didn't know why she hummed the song, only that it felt right, and the neighbor squeezed her fingers and said, "That was my mother's voice, just now." In a hospital 2 towns beyond, a nurse stared down at a man with clouded eyes and no memory left. He hadn't spoken in months until she began humming while changing his linens. One phrase only, 5 notes. He exhaled softly and whispered, "Lena, you came back," then smiled for the first time in weeks. The lullaby threaded itself gently, insistently, not as news, not as fame, but as presence. A girl painted it without knowing, strange looping notes arcing across the edge of a sketch. A baker sang it under her breath between loading batches of bread, finding her rhythm matched the cooling of loaves. A cab driver dozed off late one night and woke humming into the leather seat, the tears still fresh on his cheeks without reason. No one knew where it started, no one claimed it as theirs, but those who carried it felt something, open in them, something unnamed but deeply familiar, like a door creaking at midnight in a dream you'd had years ago, like incense you'd smelled only as a child. It stirred softness where sharpness had lingered. It lingered in silence, then returned in rustle and breath. Some said it was the song of spirits, some swore it was a chord lost between lives. Others didn't try to name it at all. They just leaned into it, knowing its wrap like a blanket thrown gently around the shoulders in a room filled with dim light. It showed up not just in voices, but in wind. Apartment buildings whistled it between floorboards in the early hours. Old church bells rang the cadence without harmony, but somehow right. A man raking leaves paused and lifted his eyes to the street where a stray cat watched him from a hydrant. He dropped the rake and whispered it aloud, "You're not alone." He couldn't say why. The cat tilted her head, blinked slowly, then walked off into the sunset without sound. Over time, people stopped asking who first heard the tune. They began to share it instead, taught it to their children with no story, only a feeling, played it on mismatched instruments, fumbled through it on old keyboards and violins long out of tune. Its magic wasn't precision, its power was memory. Had become a heart-language, sung by those who'd lost, who'd healed, who held, a song that drifted between lips and lives, not quite belonging to any era or country, but somehow stitched into all of them. It traveled in meows sometimes, in wheels humming against tracks, in breath against window panes in December when the sky felt inked in grief, and wherever it went, it folded people inward to stillness, then unfolded them gently into comfort. No one knew the whole lullaby. Still, when someone began it, a few loose notes, a mule with rhythm, a hum in a kitchen, the rest of the room would pause, and mouths would curve upward, heads would tilt. And someone, always someone, would say, "I've heard that before. I just don't know where." It had never been just a song. The realization didn't come all at once, but slowly folded into the corners of quiet evenings, pressed between the breath of those who'd hummed it without knowing why. It settled over Mara one morning as she folded laundry, one sock missing its pair, and the melody drifted softly through her thoughts, not sung, not even hummed, but there, present the way light is in a room even before the curtains are drawn. The lullaby had become ritual, not in repetition, but in reverence. It was a thread gently pulled through one life and passed to another, carried not just in voices or cat song or dreams, but in gesture, in care, in comfort, in showing up for each other when no one said the right things, but everything still felt less alone. It had never belonged to Alice, not wholly, nor Mara, nor even Clover. It had belonged to the spaces between them. It had never been written down, but it lived in the way Alice folded her daughters, blanket before bed, creasing the corners with delicate thumbs, in the way Mara touched the windowsill each night after turning out the lights, pausing with one palm laid against the glass, like waiting for a memory to press back, in the way a cat grey, unnamed, maybe new or maybe very old, would pause beneath a stranger's window and leave the echo of a tune in its wake. The lullaby had become legacy, not the kind stored in records or stitched into crests, but the kind that nestles itself in everyday presence. An old neighbor walking a child home when the sky grows storm-heavy, a hand that lingers half a second longer on another's shoulder in parting. The tray of warm tea left at a doorstep by someone who knows what missing someone sounds like. The years did not dull it, they gave it shape, resonance. Peter, now older, with a voice roughening slowly at the edges, still hummed the tune when walking home after long school days. He didn't always realize he did it, but other students began humming too. It passed through classrooms, a tune too simple to trace but too steady to ignore. Some drew it loops and waves on notebook corners. Some dreamt it. Even the cats seemed to know. New ones came. Not many, but few, each in their own time. They came mismatched and aged, wounded and waiting. Some stayed only weeks, others for years. Each one, in some quiet way, carried the echo through the turn of their heads when someone needed quiet, or the stillness they brought to uneasy sleep. Mara began to see it more clearly. The pattern that was never meant to be pattern at all. The song had never needed a singer. It lived in listening, in attention, in the invitation to rest without requirement. She found herself speaking less loudly and hearing more. She found herself placing her hand lightly on the windowsills of others, not just her own wind bringing bread to those housebound, when sitting beside someone in the hush after a hard diagnosis, when clearing the bookshelves of a friend newly widowed. There too, the lullaby sat, not as melody, not even always as memory, just as presence, as the thing that asks nothing but stays anyway. Clover's image only a moment's memory, a flicker of tail through fog remained where invocation was needed most. People didn't name it superstition, they didn't name it anything. It was enough to feel a quiet calm when a cat appeared by their door, to pause when a breeze entered a window without being invited, to hum without explanation. The tune had woven itself into fabric, seat cushions, curtain hems, the brush of air over teacups left too long to cool. It didn't carry answers, only a reminder that somewhere, someone had felt just as tired, just as lost, and had been wrapped in a presence too quiet to question. The lullaby was this: you are not alone, not because of words, not because of certainty, but because someone else has sat here too in the dark, in the Akand hummed, without knowing why, without needing to be whole first. It had watched over mothers and daughters, over old midwives and silent children. It had stirred beside firelight, drifted between eyelashes in dream, moved through the poffle of a cat unseen for years, and yet somehow never truly gone. And Mara, now older, with silver threading boldly through her hair, and lines drawn deeply, not from age but from having anchored so many others. She hummed it to Dot, not always aloud, but in the way she touched the air when she opened a door in the tuck of the quilt, in the steps up the attic stairs, in the way she wrapped a child's hand around her own without instruction or pressure, simply letting their fingers settle. The lullaby had never been just a song, because love is not ever just one thing. It's breath, it's return. It's the echoed call in the silence that reminds us someone is listening still. The song wasn't done. It had simply found more keepers, and if one day it needed to be sung again aloud, in notes or mews or the rustle of wind through windows, it would, because someone would remember not the words, but the feeling, and that was always enough. If you're up late tonight, and I mean late enough that the world feels folded, like the last page of a letter, you might hear it. Something soft, almost nothing, a single breath of sound against your window pane, a blur of fur in the corner of your vision, or a rhythm in the walls that isn't your clock, but isn't imagineered either. Don't move too fast. Don't try to name it. Let it arrive the way wind does, not to be caught, just to pass through. Maybe it's only the heater kicking in again. Maybe it's a cat prowling the fence posts outside. Or maybe something older than both, older even than the night itself, has curled beside your house and started to hum. No need to be afraid. It never comes for attention. It comes when something in the world needs stillness, when a heart is too wired to rest, when a mind circles itself like birds that don't land. That's when it finds you, the lullaby. You won't recognize the notes right away, not with your conscious brain, but your spine may uncurl, your hands might stop their clenching, your breath may lengthen without permission, and that's how you'll know. It doesn't need to be sung aloud. Sometimes a hum in the walls is enough, or a paw print left in frost on a sill that no cat claims, or a child stirring in her sleep, whispering words from someone else's memory. No one's quite sure how it travels now, only that it does, carried on tides of breath, passed gently from one quiet watcher to another. You may hum it without knowing, over dishes or as you rock a stroller. You may think it's something your mother made up, or a tune you heard once in a dream long ago. Doesn't matter, it finds you when you've forgotten how to ask for comfort, and it stays low beneath the tea kettle, between stair creaks, through the hush that lingers after you say goodnight to no one in particular. If you listen close, you might think you hear a feline sound at the edge of it. You wouldn't be wrong, but the voice doesn't matter anymore. Only the message, and that message is small but whole. You're not alone, even now, even here, especially here. The cats know this, the wind knows this, the hush between sorrow and sleep knows this. So if it comes tonight, there's a flick of tail at the edge of your dream, or a frozen pane of glass that warms ever so slightly before dawn. Don't try to capture it, just rest. Let the song find you, and when you wake, don't be surprised if the world feels quieter, not empty, but held. And someday, when someone needs it, you might find yourself humming a few notes, nothing more, and it will be enough.